Hello, and good evening. I am Sam. Just muting my desktop audio, even though there's no desktop audio coming through. But I'm Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where tonight, in a bit, when we get to it, I'm going to be reading you some weird tales of William Hope Hodgson. Someone who you've heard myself and Lucy go on about a lot. If you subscribe on Bandcamp, oh, you little band scamp, on Bandcamp, then you'll have potentially, if you've been listening to everything, heard them. Even if you're like just clicking to listen for free, that's also fine. It's allowed. You'll have heard the ones I'm going to read tonight, or some of the ones, depending on how far we get. But if not, you're in for a treat, because I just read these and just messaged Lucy at first. I'm like, these are so good. Thank you for getting me this book. This rules. So I'm just going to be hyping those up before we get there, and hopefully they'll land with you as well as it did with me, and secondly, I hope one of them, which is going to be very taxing on my voice, if I start with a voice that I intend to do for one of the characters and then commit to it, because hey, he's narrating the whole thing, so we'll see, we'll get there. But yes, hello, good evening everybody, everyone in chat, those of you who are here and chatting or working, doing whatever. If you've got us on in the background, whoops, that's me knocking pencils over. If you've got us on in the background while you're, cleaning, tidying, playing video games, crafting, it's all good. Love to have you here. That's all that matters, really. I mean, even if you can't be here, that also matters that you want to be here. But yeah, hello and good evening. What's good? And if Ant's probably going to look for a bit, Dave's doing US dates on GeoGuessr and you can't look away, that's completely fair. My suggestion for Dave, if he wants a suggested raid target, and and it's not here, because he should, no, he can raid where he likes, that's fine. I've already forgotten the name. What is it? Because it sounds like a Critter Vision. That's it. It makes me think of Chuckle Vision, which will mean nothing to people that aren't from the UK. But yes, the Twitch channel Critter Vision. If Dave raids over there, I think it's good. It's basically I forget what they are. It's a couple in the States that have some cameras set up outside with just a whole bunch of nature feeders, and it's just a parade of birds and squirrels and deer and raccoons, and like a cardinal that comes and flies in front of the camera every now and then, and they get some really cool stuff coming through. So I've kind of been sort of hooked on that channel for the last few days. It's very good. Do recommend. But yeah, I think I'm actually doing pretty good. I without saying much, because it is not my news to say, and I'm not going to really let on more than that. I've been in the vicinity of some very good news, which has been really, really great. Very much deserved and well needed. And yeah, I'm just really, really happy about that. And so that's put me in a good mood. Funnily enough, good things happening to people that you like can have a knock-on effect and brighten your day too. So I'm vibing. I'm having a good time, and I hope you all are too. Indeed, Brawler. Yay for good things. Exactly. So yeah, getting some good news come through is nice and deserved. Yeah, how's my volume? Have you got me turned up quite a bit? I know I had to turn myself down for something the other day. It wasn't for what, it was something else. Hello, you are here now. Hi. Hello, welcome. I hope that you are well too. Yeah, how am I coming through? Because I'm still always conscious that like the streams, I guess, in the Longest Johns and the extended Longest Johns network often have not exactly audio problems. Like everyone on Twitch has audio problems, but we just generally seem collectively as a group rather quiet. Sort of almost in need of a compressor, so that we can actually turn the lower sounds up and not have the top end blow things out. But no, none of us do that. You're an audio problem. Yeah, exactly. Funnily enough, was just talking Noah. Yeah, so I don't know. I know I turned myself down the other day, But if you've got me up into like the 50 to 70% range, you let me know. I'll turn myself back up a little bit and whatnot. But otherwise, yeah, it's. You assume I may have said that you've had a good news day. I wasn't that specific. It's probably quite obvious, but no. What I let on was that I have been in the vicinity of good news, and it has brightened my day because it was very much deserved and well earned good news. Not really saying more because it's not my news to give. But there you go. Cat's now out of the bag and coming into the room, which I'm just going to do. In you come. Yes. Now we have also Joey. The cat is the good news. I mean, he always is, but in this specific instance, there is other good news aside from the presence of a cat. Oh, there we go. Yes, Lucy has been asked to do a very cool project, capitalized, in autumn, which, hell yeah, so deserved. Yeah, I am legit thrilled about this. And if that's the case, you can imagine what she's like. So, yeah, this is so good. Yeah. But frankly, I'm in Europe too, much better than the UK. Yes, exactly, because you know what? In Europe, they actually care about artists. They have like rights and payment and stuff. You know, the governments care about these things a bit more than they do here, because it turns out arts are important. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yes, okay, Joey is settled on my lap. Government funding? Who knew? But yeah, I think before I get too much into other topics, I mean, obviously, by all means, do please feel free to keep discussing this in chat. I'm just going to say some words at you. But yes, Hope Hodgson, indeed. What we have coming up, I've not timed these out to know exactly how long things are going to be. We've got a couple of short stories and a couple of slightly longer ones. I'm going to see how much I get through. At least one of them I might leave out. But I'm going to start with the first one of these, which will be called... Oh, I've not planned the text. Whoops. Lucy, are you alright finding those quickly for me? A tropical horror would be the first one. If you're able to grab that and pin that, because I knew there was something else forgetting. If not, I can do it quickly. Thank you, that's really kind. But yeah, this is a bit of nautical nonsense from William Hope Hodgson. What to say about them, really? Where was he? He lived from 1877 to 1918. Died in the First World War. It's true. I saw that he died in the First World War. I don't know whether that meant during the time frame of the First World War, as in that was the period in which he died, or whether he was actually fighting on the side of, as a Brit, presumably the Allies. Us anyway. Let's not get into the First World War politics. But yeah, he was an author of that time, and seems to be sort of quite renowned as one of those early generation of weird horror fiction things. Sort of inspired a fair few people, it seems like, and yeah. Wrote a number of short stories, a series around a sort of paranormal detective called Karnacki, based on, is it something John Silence or something, an Algernon Blackwood character, sort of similar thing, basically spooky Sherlock Holmes. And yeah, wrote a number of other another sort of trilogy of sort of sea horror stories, Because, he was a sailor. And so that very much influenced his work, and wrote about the weird horrors of the sea, which is what we are going to be experiencing tonight. So, with all this talking up, we might as well actually just get into it. Let's just catch my breath. Hello, because I've been breathing from the top of my lungs, and I've got a whole lot more here that I need to use. And I have Joey on my lap to distract me, which is great. That's absolutely going to catch me out. Weird horrors of the sea are an excellent vibe. Well then, listen close and listen good. Because we start off tonight with A Tropical Horror by William Hope Hodgson. We are 130 days out from Melbourne, and for 3 weeks we have lain in this sweltering calm. It is midnight, and our watch on deck until 4 a.m. I go out and sit on the hatch. A minute later, Jockey, our youngest apprentice, joins me for a chatter. Many are the hours we have sat thus and talked in the night watches, though, to be sure, it is Jockey who does the talking. I am content to smoke and listen, giving an occasional grunt at seasons to show that I am attentive. Jockey has been silent for some time, his head bent in meditation. Suddenly he looks up, evidently with the intention of making some remark. As he does so, I see his face stiffen with a nameless horror. He crouches back, his eyes staring past me at some unseen fear. Then his mouth opens. He gives forth a strangulated cry and topples backward off the hatch, striking his head against the deck. Fearing I know not what, I turn to look. Great heavens! Rising above the bulwarks, seen plainly in the bright moonlight, is a vast, slobbering mouth a fathom across. From the huge dripping lips hang great tentacles. As I look, the thing comes further over the rail. It is rising higher and higher. There are no eyes visible, only that fearful slobbering mouth set on the tremendous trunk-like neck, which, even as I watch, is curling inward with the stealthy celerity of an enormous eel. Over it comes in vast, heaving folds. Will it never end? The ship gives a slow, sullen roll to starboard as she feels the weight. Then the tail, a broad, flat-shaped mass, slips over the teak rail and falls with a loud slump onto the deck. For a few seconds the hideous creature lies heaped in writhing, slimy coils. Then, with quick, darting movements, the monstrous head travels along the deck. Close by the mainmast stands the harness casks, and alongside of these a freshly opened cask of salt beef with the top loosely replaced. The smell of the meat seems to attract the monster, and I can hear it sniffing with a vast, indrawing breath. Then those lips open, displaying 4 huge fangs. There is a quick forward motion of the head, a sudden crashing, crunching sound, and beef and barrel have disappeared. The noise brings one of the ordinary seamen out of the forecastle. Coming into the night, he can see nothing for a moment. Then, as he gets further aft, he sees, and with horrified cries rushes forward. Too late. From the mouth of the thing there flashes forth a long, broad blade of glistening white set with fierce teeth. I avert my eyes, but cannot shut out the sickening glut that follows. The man on the lookout, attracted by the disturbance, has witnessed the tragedy and flies for refuge into the forecastle, flinging to the heavy iron door after him. The carpenter and sailmaker come running out from the half-deck in their drawers. Seeing the awful thing, they rush aft into the cabin with shouts of fear. The second mate, after one glance over the break of the poop, runs down the companionway with the helmsman after him. I can hear them barring the scuttle, and abruptly I realise that I am on the main deck alone. So far I have forgotten my own danger. The past few minutes seem like a portion of an awful dream. Now, however, I comprehend my position, and, shaking off the horror that has held me, turn to seek safety. As I do so, my eyes fall upon Jockey, lying huddled and senseless with fright where he has fallen. I cannot leave him there. Close by stands the empty half-deck, a little steel-built house with iron doors. The lee one is hooked open. Once inside, I am safe. Up to the present, the thing has seemed to be unconscious of my presence. Now, however, the huge barrel-like head sways in my direction. Then comes a muffled bellow, and the great tongue flickers in and out as the brute turns and swirls aft to meet me. I know there is not a moment to lose, and, picking up the helpless lad, I make a run for the open door. It is only distant a few yards, but that awful shape is coming down the deck to me in great wreathing coils. I reach the house and tumble in with my burden, then out on deck again to unhook and close the door. Even as I do so, something white curls round the end of the house. With a bound, I am inside, and the door is shut and bolted. Through the thick glass of the ports, I see the thing sweep round the house, in vain search for me. Jockey has not moved yet, so, kneeling down, I loosen his shirt collar and sprinkle some water from the beaker over his face. While I am doing this, I hear Morgan shout something. Then comes a great shriek of terror, and again that sickening glut, glut. Jockey stirs uneasily, rubs his eyes and sits up suddenly. "Was that Morgan shouting?" he breaks off with a cry. Where are we? I've had such awful dreams." At this moment there is a sound of running footsteps on the deck, and I hear Morgan's voice at the door. "Tom, open!" He stops abruptly and gives an awful cry of despair. Then I hear him rush forward. Through the porthole I see him spring into the fore-rigging and scramble madly aloft. Something steals up after him. It shows white in the moonlight. It wraps itself around his right ankle. Morgan stops dead, plucks out his sheath knife, and hacks fiercely at the fiendish thing. It lets go, and in a second he is over the top and running for dear life up the topgallant rigging. A time of quietness follows, and presently I see that the day is breaking. Not a sound can be heard save the heavy, gasping breathing of the thing. As the sun rises higher, the creature stretches itself out along the deck and seems to enjoy the warmth. Still no sound, either from the men forward or the officers aft. I can only suppose that they are afraid of attracting its attention. Yet, a little later, I hear the report of a pistol away aft, and looking out I see the serpent raise its huge head as though listening. As it does so, I get a good view of the forepart, and in the daylight see what the night has hidden. There, right about the mouth, is a pair of little pig eyes that seem to twinkle with a diabolical intelligence. It is swaying its head slowly from side to side. Then, without warning, it turns quickly and looks right through the port. I dodge out of sight, but not soon enough. It has seen me, and brings its great mouth up against the glass. I hold my breath. My God, if it breaks the glass! I cower, horrified. From the direction of the port there comes a loud, harsh, scraping sound. I shiver. Then I remember that there are little iron doors to shut over the ports in bad weather. Without a moment's waste of time, I rise to my feet and slam the door over the port. Then I go round to the others and do the same. We are now in darkness, and I tell Jockey in a whisper to light the lamp, which, after some fumbling, he does. About an hour before midnight I fall asleep. I am awakened suddenly some hours later by a scream of agony and the rattle of a water dipper. There is a slight scuffling sound. Then that soul-revolting glut, glut. I guess what has happened. One of the men forward has slipped out of the forecastle to try and get a little water. Evidently, He has trusted to the darkness to hide his movements. Poor beggar. He has paid for his attempt with his life. After this, I cannot sleep, though the rest of the night passes quickly enough. Towards morning, I doze a bit, but wake every few minutes with a start. Jockey is sleeping peacefully. Indeed, he seems worn out, with the terrible strain of the past 24 hours. About 8 a.m. I call him, and we make a light breakfast off the dry ship's biscuit and water. Of the latter, happily, we have a good supply. Jockey seems more himself, and starts to talk a little, possibly somewhat louder than is safe, for as he chatters on, wondering how it will end, there comes a tremendous blow against the side of the house, making it ring again. After this, Jockey is very silent. As we sit there, I cannot but wonder what all the rest are doing, and how the poor beggars forward are faring, cooped up without water, as the tragedy of the night has proved. Towards noon, I hear a loud bang, followed by a terrific bellowing. Then comes a great smashing of woodwork, and the cries of men in pain. Vainly, I ask myself what has happened. I begin to reason. By the sound of the report, it was evidently something much heavier than a rifle or pistol, and judging from the mad roaring of the thing, the shot must have done some execution. On thinking it over further, I become convinced that, by some means, those aft have got a hold of the small signal cannon we carry, and though I know that some have been hurt, perhaps killed, yet a feeling of exultation seizes me as I listen to the roars of the thing, and realize that it is badly wounded, perhaps mortally. After a while, however, the bellowing dies away, and only an occasional roar, denoting more of anger than aught else, is heard. Presently I become aware, by the ship's canting over to starboard, that the creature has gone over to that side, and a great hope springs up within me that possibly it has had enough of us and is going over the rail into the sea. For a time, all is silent, and my hope grows stronger. I lean across and nudge Jockey, who is sleeping with his head on the table. He starts up sharply with a loud cry. "Hush!" I whisper hoarsely. "I'm not certain, but I do believe it's gone." Jockey's face brightens wonderfully, and he questions me eagerly. We wait another hour or so, with hope ever rising. Our confidence is returning fast. Not a sound can we hear, not even the breathing of the beast. I get out some biscuits, and Jockey, after rummaging in the locker, produces a small piece of pork and a bottle of ship's vinegar. We fall to with a relish. After our long abstinence from food, the meal acts on us like wine. And what must Jockey do but insist on opening the door to make sure the thing has gone? This I will not allow, telling him that at least it will be safer to open the iron port covers first and have a look out. Jockey argues, but I am immovable. He becomes excited. I believe the youngster is light-headed. Then, as I turn to unscrew one of the after covers, Jockey makes a dash at the door. Before he can undo the bolts, I have him, and after a short struggle lead him back to the table. Even as I endeavour to quieten him, there comes at the starboard door, the door that Jockey has tried to open, a sharp, loud sniff, followed immediately by a thunderous grunting howl, and a foul stench of putrid breath sweeps in under the door. A great trembling takes me, and were it not for the carpenter's tool chest, I should fall. Jockey turns very white and is violently sick, after which he is seized by a hopeless fit of sobbing. Hour after hour passes, and, weary to death, I lie down on the chest upon which I have been sitting, and try to rest. It must be about 2:30 in the morning, after a somewhat longer doze, that I am suddenly awakened by a most tremendous uproar away forward. Men's voices shrieking, cursing, praying, but in spite of the terror expressed, so weak and feeble. While in the midst, and at times broken off short with that hellishly aggressive glut, is the unearthly bellowing of the thing. Fear incarnate seizes me, and I can only fall on my knees and pray. Too well I know what is happening. Jockey has slept through it all, and I am thankful. Presently, under the door there steals a narrow ribbon of light, and I know that the day has broken on the second morning of our imprisonment. I let Jockey sleep on. I will let him have peace while he may. Time passes, but I take little notice. The thing is quiet, probably sleeping. About midday I eat a little biscuit and drink some of the water. Jockey still sleeps. It is best so. A sound breaks the stillness. The ship gives a slight heave, and I know that once more the thing is awake. Round the deck it moves, causing the ship to roll perceptibly. Once it goes forward, I fancy, to again explore the forecastle. Evidently it finds nothing, for it returns almost immediately. It pauses a moment at the house, then goes on further aft. Up aloft, somewhere in the fore-rigging, there rings out a peal of wild laughter, though sounding very faint and far away. The horror stops suddenly. I listen intently, but hear nothing save a sharp creaking beyond the after end of the house, as though a strain had come upon the rigging. A minute later, I hear a cry aloft, followed almost instantly by a loud crash on deck that seems to shake the ship. I wait in anxious fear. What is happening? The minutes pass slowly. Then comes another frightened shout. It ceases suddenly. The suspense has become terrible, and I am no longer able to bear it. Very cautiously I open one of the after-port covers and peep out to see a fearful sight. There, with its tail upon the deck and its vast body curled round the mainmast, is the monster, its head above the topsail yard, and its great claw-armed tentacle waving in the air. It is the first proper sight that I have had of the thing. Good heavens, it must weigh 100 tons. Knowing that I shall have time, I open the port itself, then crane my head out and look up. There, on the extreme end of the lower topsail yard, I see one of the able seamen. Even down here I note the staring horror of his face. At this moment he sees me and gives a weak, hoarse cry for help. I can do nothing for him. As I look, the great tongue shoots out and licks him off the yard, much as might a dog a fly off the pane of the window pane. Higher still, but happily out of reach, are two more of the men. As far as I can judge, they are lashed to the mast above the royal yard. The thing attempts to reach them, but after a futile effort it ceases and starts to slide down, coil on coil, to the deck. While doing this, I notice a great gaping wound on its body some 20 feet above the tail. I drop my gaze from aloft and look aft. The cabin door is torn from its hinges, and the bulkhead, which, unlike the half-deck, is of teak wood, is partly broken down. With a shudder, I realize the cause of those cries after the cannon shot. Turning, I screw my head round to try to see the foremast, but cannot. The sun, I notice, is low and the night is near. Then I draw in my head and fasten up both port and cover. How will it end? Oh, how will it end? After a while, Jockey wakes up. He is very restless, yet, though he has eaten nothing during the day, I cannot get him to touch anything. Night draws on. We are too weary, too dispirited to talk. I lie down, but not to sleep. Time passes. A ventilator rattles violently somewhere on the main deck, and there sounds constantly that slurring, gritty noise. Later, I hear a cat's agonized howl, and then again all is quiet. Some time after comes a great splash alongside. Then, for some hours, all is silent as the grave. Occasionally I sit up on the chest and listen, yet never a whisper of noise comes to me. There is an absolute silence. Even the monotonous creak of the gear has died away entirely, and at last a real hope is springing up within me. That splash, this silence. Surely I am justified in hoping. I do not wake Jockey this time. I will prove first for myself that all is safe. Still I wait. I will run no unnecessary risks. After a time I creep to the afterport and will listen, but there is no sound. I put up my hand and feel at the screw, then again I hesitate, yet not for long. Noiselessly I begin to unscrew the fastening of the heavy shield. It swings loose on its hinge, and I pull it back and peer out. My heart is beating madly. Everything seems strangely dark outside. Perhaps the moon has gone behind a cloud. Suddenly, a beam of moonlight enters through the port and goes as quickly. I stare out. Something moves. Again the light streams in, and now I seem to be looking into a great cavern, at the bottom of which quivers and curls something palely white. My heart seems to stand still. It is the horror. I start back and seize the iron port flap to slam it to. As I do so, something strikes the glass like a steam ram, shatters it to atoms, and flicks past me into the berth. I scream and spring away. The port is quite filled with it. The lamp shows it dimly. It is curling and twisting here and there. It is as thick as a tree and covered with a smooth, slimy skin. At the end, its great claw, like a lobster's, is a great claw, like a lobster's, only 1,000 times larger. I cower down into the farthest corner. It has broken the tool chest to pieces with one click of those frightful mandibles. Jockey has crawled under a bunk. The thing sweeps round in my direction. I feel a drop of sweat trickle slowly down my face. It tastes salty. Nearer comes that awful death. Crash! I roll over backwards. It has crushed the water beaker against which I leant, and I am rolling in the water across the floor. The claw drives up, then down, with a quick, uncertain movement, striking the deck a dull, heavy blow a foot from my head. Jockey gives a little gasp of horror. Slowly the thing rises and starts feeling its way round the berth. It plunges into a bunk and pulls out a bolster, nips it in half and drops it, then moves on. It is feeling along the deck. As it does so, it comes across a half of the bolster. It seems to toy with it, then picks it up and takes it out through the port. A wave of putrid air fills the berth. There is a grating sound, and something enters the port again, something white and tapering and set with teeth. Hither and thither it curls, rasping over the bunks, ceiling and deck, with a noise like that of a great saw at work. Twice it flickers above my head, and I close my eyes. Then off it goes again. It sounds now on the opposite side of the berth, and nearer to Jockey. Suddenly the harsh, raspy noise becomes muffled, as though the teeth were passing across some soft substance. Jockey gives a horrid little scream that breaks off into a bubbling, whistling sound. I open my eyes. The tip of the vast tongue is curled tightly round something that drips, then is quickly withdrawn, allowing the moonbeams to steal again into the berth. I rise to my feet. Looking round, I note, in a mechanical sort of way, the wrecked state of the berth. The shattered chests, dismantled bunks, and something else. Jockey! I cry, and tingle all over. There is that awful thing again at the port. I glance round for a weapon. I will revenge Jockey. Ah, there, right under the lamp, where the wreck of the carpenter's chest strews the floor, lies a small hatchet. I spring forward and seize it. It is small, but so keen. So keen. I feel its razor edge lovingly. Then I am back at the port. I stand to one side and raise my weapon. The great tongue is feeling its way to those fearsome remains. It reaches them. As it does so, with a scream of "Jockey! Jockey!" I strike savagely again and again and again, gasping as I strike. Once more, and the monstrous mass falls to the deck, writhing like a hideous eel. A vast, warm flood rushes in through the porthole. There is a sound of breaking steel and an enormous bellowing. A singing comes in my ears and grows louder, louder. Then the berth grows indistinct and suddenly dark. Extract from the log of the steamship Hispaniola. June 24th. Latitude blank N, longitude blank west, 11 a.m. Sighted four-masted bark about 4 points on the port bow, flying signal of distress. Ran down to her and sent a boat aboard. She proved to be the Glendoon, homeward bound from Melbourne to London. Found things in a terrible state. Decks covered with blood and slime. Steel deck house stove in. Broke open door and discovered youth of about 19 in last stage of inanition. Also part remains of boy about 14 years of age. There was a great quantity of blood in the place and a huge curled-up mass of whitish flesh weighing about 1/2 ton, one end of which appeared to have been hacked through with a sharp instrument. Found forecastle door opened and hanging from one hinge. Doorway bulged as though something had been forced through. Went inside. Terrible state of affairs, blood everywhere, broken chests, smashed bunks, but no men nor remains. Went aft again, and found youth showing signs of recovery. When he came round, he gave the name of Thompson. Said they had been attacked by a huge serpent, though thought it must have been sea serpent. He was too weak to say much, but told us that there were some men up the mainmast. Sent a hand aloft, who reported them lashed to the royal mast and quite dead. Went aft to the cabin. Here we found the bulkhead smashed to pieces and the cabin door lying on the deck near the after hatch. Found body of Captain Down Lazarette, but no officers. Noticed, amongst the wreckage, part of the carriage of a small cannon. Came aboard again. Have sent second mate with 6 men to work her into port. Thompson is with us. He has written out his version of the affair. We certainly consider that the state of the ship, as we found her, bears out in every respect his story. Signed, William Norton, Master, Tom Briggs, First Mate. And that is the end of a tropical horror. So, there you go. Turns out there's big old sea monsters, and what they're going to do is, on like the second paragraph, rock up onto your boat and eat your crew. Should have given him treatsies? Exactly. That did nearly get me when I looked up and saw him just wants him's treatsies. Also, I noticed we're all completely fine with everything that happens until he mentions the scream of a cat, and then it's like, nope, that's it, Hodgson, you've gone too far. And I, for one, agree. There is another story which I won't be reading tonight, which also has an unfortunate outcome for a cat, which I actually made a note to myself that when I ever get round to reading it, which I absolutely will do, that I will note beforehand that this one, features bad news for a cat. Just be advised. But yes. There we go. That is what we are in for. Your immediate thought was, oh, he's just never seen a giant squid. But it ain't a giant squid. No. No, this is something unseen and eldritch coming out of the sea. Right. This next one's a bit longer. Not too much longer. So, let's get on. Spooky squids. Also, yeah, hey, Diana, welcome. Good to see you. Hope you're well. Right. Joey's moved. He's onto the bed, so I can really get up and move around now and explore the space and get into this one. But this one, we're going to see the voice. Which one is this? This one is the voice in the night. So, yeah, if there was a voice in this, which is the majority of it, which may be a bit much, so it might have to change to something a little bit more manageable for the duration of the story, but we'll see. That's why we do live readings like this, because it's fun. But yes, this next story is The Voice in the Night. It was a dark, starless night. We were becalmed in the northern Pacific. Our exact position I do not know, for the sun had been hidden during the course of a weary, breathless week by a thin haze which had seemed to float above us, about the height of our mastheads, at whiles descending and shrouding the surrounding sea. With there being no wind, we had steadied the tiller, and I was the only man on deck. The crew, consisting of 2 men and a boy, were sleeping forward in their den, while Will, my friend and the master of our little craft, was aft in his bunk on the port side of the little cabin. Suddenly, from out of the surrounding darkness, there came a hail. "Schooner ahoy!" The cry was so unexpected that I gave no immediate answer because of my surprise. It came again, a voice curiously throaty and inhuman, calling from somewhere upon the dark sea away on our port broadside. "Schooner ahoy!" "Hello?" I sung out, having gathered my wits somewhat. "What are you? What do you want?" "You need not be afraid," answered the queer voice, having probably noticed some trace of my confusion in my tone. "I am only an old man." The pause sounded oddly, but it was only afterwards that it came back to me with any significance. "Why don't you come alongside, then?" I queried somewhat snappishly, for I liked not his hinting at my having been a trifle shaken. I can't. It wouldn't be safe." The voice broke off, and there was silence. "What do you mean?" I asked, growing more and more astonished. "Why not safe? Where are you?" I listened for a moment, but there came no answer. And then, a sudden indefinite suspicion of I knew not what coming to me, I stepped swiftly to the binnacle and took out the lighted lamp. At the same time, I knocked on the deck with my heel to waken Will. Then I was back at the side, throwing the yellow funnel of light out into the silent immensity beyond our rail. As I did so, I heard a slight, muffled cry and then the sound of a splash, as though someone had dipped oars abruptly. Yet I cannot say that I saw anything with certainty, save it seemed to me that with that first flash of light there had been something upon the waters where now there was nothing. "Hello there," I called. "What foolery is this?" But there came only the indistinct sounds of a boat being pulled away into the night. Then I heard Will's voice from the direction of the after scuttle. "What's up, George?" "Come here, Will," I said. "What is it?" he asked, coming across the deck. I told him the queer thing which had happened. He put several questions. Then, after a moment's silence, he raised his hands to his lips and hailed, "Boat ahoy!" From a long distance away there came back to us a faint reply, and my companion repeated his call. Presently, after a short period of silence, there grew on our hearing the muffled sound of oars, at which Will hailed again. This time there was a reply. "Put away the light." "I'm damned if I will," muttered Will. Sorry, I got that all wrong. "I'm damned if I will," I muttered, but Will told me to do as the voice bade, and shoved it down under the bulwarks. "Come nearer," he said, and the oar strokes continued. Then, when apparently some half-dozen fathoms distant, they again ceased. "Come alongside," exclaimed Will. "There's nothing to be frightened of aboard here." "Promise that you will not show the light." "What's to do with you?" I burst out, "that you're so infernally afraid of the light?" "Because—" began the voice and stopped short. "Because what?" I asked, quickly. Will put his hand on my shoulder. "Shut up a minute, old man," he said in a low voice. "Let me tackle him." He leant more over the rail. "See here, mister," he said. "This is a pretty queer business, you coming upon us like this, right out in the middle of the blessed Pacific. How are we to know what sort of a hanky-panky trick you're up to? You say there's only one of you. How are we to know, unless we get a squint at you, eh? What's your objection to the light, anyway?" As he finished, I heard the noise of the oars again, and then the voice came, but now from a greater distance and sounding extremely hopeless and pathetic. "I'm sorry. Sorry, I would not have troubled you, only I'm hungry, and so is she." The voice died away, and the sound of the oars dipping irregularly was borne to us. "Stop!" sung out Will. "I don't want to drive you away. Come back. We'll keep the light hidden if you don't like it." He turned to me. It's a damned queer rig, this, but I think there's nothing to be afraid of." There was a question in his tone, and I replied, "No, I think the poor devil's been wrecked around here and gone crazy." The sound of the oars drew nearer. "Shove that lamp back in the binnacle," said Will. Then he leaned over the rail and listened. I replaced the lamp and came back to his side. The dipping of the oars ceased some dozen yards distant. "Won't you come alongside now?" asked Will in an even voice. "I have put the lamp back. I've had the lamp put back in the binnacle." I cannot," replied the voice. "I dare not come nearer. I dare not even pay you for the provisions." "That's all right," said Will, and hesitated. "You're welcome to as much grub as you can take." Again he hesitated. "You're very good," exclaimed the voice. "May God, who understands everything, reward you." It broke off, huskily. The lady?" said Will abruptly. "Is she—" "I have left her behind upon the island," came the voice. "What island?" I cut in. "I know not its name," returned the voice. "I would to God—" it began, and checked itself as suddenly. "Could we not send a boat for her?" asked Will at this point. "No," said the voice with extraordinary emphasis. "My God, no!" There was a moment's pause, then it added, in a tone which seemed a merited reproach, "It was because of our want I ventured, because her agony tortured me." "I am a forgetful brute," exclaimed Will. "Just 1 minute, whoever you are, and I will bring you up something at once." In a couple of minutes he was back again, and his arms were full of various edibles. He paused at the rail. "Can't you come alongside for them?" he asked. "No, I dare not," replied the voice, and it seemed to me that in its tones I detected a note of stifled craving, as though the owner hushed a mortal desire. It came to me then in a flash that the poor old creature out there in the darkness was suffering for actual need of that which Will held in his arms, and yet, because of some unintelligible dread, refraining from dashing to the side of our little schooner and receiving it. And with the lightning-like conviction there came the knowledge that the invisible was not mad, but sanely facing some intolerable horror. "Damn it, Will," I said, full of many feelings over which predominated a vast sympathy. "Get a box. We must float off the stuff to him in it." This we did, propelling it away from the vessel out into the darkness by means of a boat hook. in a minute, a slight cry from the invisible came to us, and we knew that he had secured the box. A little later he called out a farewell to us, and so heartful a blessing that I am sure we were the better for it. Then, without more ado, we heard the ply of oars across the darkness. "Pretty soon off," remarked Will, with perhaps just a little sense of injury. "Wait," I replied. "I think somehow he'll come back. He must have been badly needing that food." "And the lady," said Will. For a moment he was silent. Then he continued, "It's the queerest thing I've ever tumbled across since I've been fishing." "Yes," I said, and fell to pondering. And so the time slipped away. An hour, another, and still Will stayed with me, for the queer adventure had knocked all desire for sleep out of him. The third hour was 3 parts through when we heard again the sound of oars across the silent ocean. "Listen," said Will, a low note of excitement in his voice. "He's coming, just as I thought," I muttered. The dipping of the oars grew nearer, and I noted that the strokes were firmer and longer. The food had been needed. They came to a stop a little distance off the broadside, and the queer voice came again to us through the darkness. "Schooner ahoy!" "That you?" asked Will. "Yes," replied the voice. "I left you suddenly, but there was great need." "The lady?" questioned Will. "The lady is grateful now on earth. She will be more grateful soon, in heaven." Will began to make some reply, in a puzzled voice, but became confused and broke off short. I said nothing. I was wondering at the curious pauses, and, apart from my wonder, I was full of a great sympathy. The voice continued. She and I have talked as we shared the results of God's tenderness and yours," Will interposed, but without coherence. "I beg of you not to belittle your deed of Christian charity this night," said the voice. "Be sure that it has not escaped his notice." It stopped, and there was a full minute's silence. Then it came again. "We have spoken together upon that which has befallen us. We had thought to go out without telling any of the terror which has come into our lives. She is with me in believing that tonight's happenings are under a special ruling, and that it is God's wish that we should tell to you all that we have suffered since... "Yes?" said Will, softly. "Since the sinking of the Albatross." "Ah!" I exclaimed involuntarily. "She left Newcastle for Frisco some 6 months ago and hasn't been heard of since." "Yes," answered the voice, "but some few degrees to the north of the line she was caught in a terrible storm and dismasted. When the day came, it was found that she was leaking badly, and presently it falling to a calm, the sailors took to the boats, leaving a young lady, my fiancée, and myself upon the wreck. We were below, gathering together a few of our belongings when they left. They were entirely callous through fear, and when we came up upon the decks, we saw them only as small shapes afar off upon the horizon. Yet we did not despair, but set to work and constructed a small raft. Upon this we put such few matters as it would hold, including a quantity of water and some ship's biscuit. Then, the vessel being very deep in the water, we got ourselves onto the raft and pushed off. It was later when I observed that we seemed to be in the way of some tide or current, which bore us from the ship at an angle, so that in the course of 3 hours, by my watch, her hull became invisible to our sight, her broken mast remaining in view for a somewhat longer period. Then, towards evening it grew misty, and so through the night. The next day we were still encompassed by the mist, the weather remaining quiet. For 4 days we drifted through this strange haze, until, On the evening of the 4th day, there grew upon our ears the murmur of breakers at a distance. Gradually it became plainer, and somewhat after midnight it appeared to sound upon either hand at no very great space. The raft was raised upon a swell several times, and then we were in smooth water, and the noise of the breakers was behind. When the morning came, we found that we were in a sort of great lagoon, but of this we noticed little at the time, for close before us, through the enshrouding mist, loomed the hull of a large sailing vessel. With one accord we fell upon our knees and thanked God, for we thought that here was an end to our perils. We had much to learn. The raft drew near to the ship, and we shouted on them to take us aboard, but none answered. Presently the raft touched against the side of the vessel, and, seeing a rope hanging downwards, I seized it and began to climb. Yet I had much ado to make my way up, because of a kind of grey lichenous fungus which had seized upon the rope, and which blotched the side of the ship lividly. I reached the rail and clambered over it, onto the deck. Here I saw that the decks were covered in great patches with the grey masses, some of them rising into nodules several feet in height. But at the time I thought less of this matter than of the possibility of there being people aboard the ship. I shouted, but none answered. Then I went to the door below the poop deck. I opened it and peered in. There was a great smell of staleness, so that I knew in a moment that nothing living was within, and with that knowledge I shut the door quickly, for I felt suddenly lonely. I went back to the side where I had scrambled up. My sweetheart was still sitting quietly upon the raft. Seeing me look down, she called up to know whether there were any aboard of the ship. I replied that the vessel had the appearance of having been long deserted, but that if she would wait a little I would see whether there was anything in the shape of a ladder by which she could ascend to the deck. Then we would make a search through the vessel together. A little later, on the opposite side of the decks, I found a rope-side ladder. This I carried across, and a minute afterwards she was beside me. Together we explored the cabins and apartments in the after side of the ship, but nowhere was there any sign of life. Here and there within the cabins themselves we came across odd patches of that queer fungus, but this, as my sweetheart said, could be cleansed away. In the end, having assured ourselves that the after portion of the vessel was empty, we picked our ways to the bows, between the ugly grey nodules of that strange growth, and here we made a further search which told us that there was indeed none aboard but ourselves. This being now beyond any doubt, we returned to the stern of the ship and proceeded to make ourselves as comfortable as possible. Together we cleared out and cleaned out 2 of the cabins, and after that I made examination whether there was anything eatable in the ship. This I soon found was so, and thanked God in my heart for his goodness. In addition to this I discovered the whereabouts of the fresh-water pump, and having fixed it I found the water drinkable, though somewhat unpleasant to the taste. For several days we stayed aboard the ship without attempting to get to the shore. We were easily engaged in making the place habitable, busily engaged even. Yet even thus early we became aware that our lot was even less to be desired than might have been imagined. Although, as a first step, we scraped away the odd patches of growth that studded the floors and walls of the cabins and saloon, yet they returned almost to their original size within the space of 24 hours, which not only discouraged us but gave us a feeling of vague unease. Still, we would not admit ourselves beaten, so set to work afresh, and not only scraped away the fungus, but soaked the places where it had been with carbolic, a canful of which I had found in the pantry. Yet by the end of the week the growth had returned in full strength, and, in addition, it had spread to other places, as though our touching it had allowed germs from it to travel elsewhere. On the 7th morning my sweetheart woke to find a small patch of it growing on her pillow, close to her face. At that she came to me, so soon as she could get her garments upon her. I was in the galley at the time, lighting the fire for breakfast. "Come here, John," she said, and led me aft. When I saw the thing upon her pillow, I shuddered, and then and there we agreed to go right out of the ship and see whether we could not fare to make ourselves more comfortable ashore. Hurriedly we gathered together our few belongings, and even among these I found the fungus had been at work, for one of her shawls had a little lump of it growing near one edge. I threw the whole thing over the side, without saying anything to her. The raft was still alongside, but it was too clumsy to guide, and I lowered down a small boat that hung across the stern, and in this we made our way to the shore. Yet, as we drew near to it, I became gradually aware that here the vile fungus, which had driven us from the ship, was growing riot. In places it rose into horrible, fantastic mounds which seemed almost to quiver as with a quiet life when the wind blew across them. Here and there it took on the forms of vast fingers, and in others it just spread out flat and smooth and treacherous. Odd places it appeared as grotesque stunted trees, seeming extraordinarily kinked and gnarled, the whole quaking vilely at times. At first it seemed to us that there was no single portion of the surrounding shore which was not hidden beneath the masses of the hideous lichen. Yet in this I found we were mistaken, for somewhat later, coasting along the shore at a little distance, we descried a smooth white patch of what appeared to be fine sand, and there we landed. It was not sand. What it was, I do not know. All that I have observed is that upon it the fungus will not grow, while everything else, save where the sand-like earth wanders oddly pathwise, amid the grey desolation of the lichen, there is nothing but that loathsome greyness. It is difficult to make you understand how cheered we were to find one place that was absolutely free from the growth, and here we deposited our belongings. Then we went back to the ship for such things as it needed to us, so as it seemed to us we should need. Among other matters, I managed to bring ashore with me one of the ship's sails, and with which I constructed 2 small tents, which, though exceedingly rough-shaped, served the purpose for which they were intended. In these we lived and stored our various necessities, and thus, for a matter of some 4 weeks, all went smoothly, and without particular unhappiness. Indeed, I may say with much of happiness, for we were together. It was on the thumb of her right hand that the growth first showed. It was only a small circular spot, much like a little grey mole. My God, how the fear leapt to my heart when she showed me the place. We cleansed it, between us, washing it with carbolic and water. In the morning of the following day she showed her hand to me again. The grey, warty thing had returned. For a little while we looked at one another in silence. Then, still wordless, we started again to remove it. In the midst of the operation, she spoke suddenly. "What's that on the side of your face, dear?" Her voice was sharp with anxiety. I put up my hand to feel. "There, under the hair by your ear, a little to the front a bit." My finger rested upon the place, and then I knew. "Let us get your thumb done first," I said, and she submitted only because she was afraid to touch me until it was cleansed. I finished washing and disinfecting her thumb, and then she turned to my face. After it was finished, we sat together and talked a while of many things, for there had come into our lives sudden, very terrible thoughts. We were, all at once, afraid of something worse than death. I've just lost my place on the page. We spoke of loading the boat with provisions and water and making our way out onto the sea. Yet we were helpless for many causes, and the growth had attacked us already. We decided to stay. God would do with us what was his will. We would wait. A month, 2 months, 3 months passed, and the places grew somewhat. And there had come others. Yet we fought so strenuously with the fear that its headway was but slow, comparatively speaking. Occasionally we ventured off to the ship for such stores as we needed. There we found that the fungus grew persistently. One of the nodules on the main deck became soon as high as my head. We had now given up all thought or hope of leaving the island. We had realized that it would be unallowable to go among healthy humans with the thing from which we were suffering. With this determination and knowledge in our minds, we knew that we should have to husband our food and water, for we did not know at that time, but we should possibly live for many years. This reminds me that I have told you I am an old man. Judged by years, this is not so, but... He broke off, then continued somewhat abruptly. As I was saying, we knew that we should have to use care in the matter of food, but we had no idea then how little food there was left of which to take care. It was a week later that I made the discovery that all the other bread tanks, which I had supposed full, were empty, and that, beyond odd tins of vegetables and meat and some other matters, we had nothing on which to depend but the bread in the tank which I had already opened. After learning this, I bestirred myself to do what I could and set to work at fishing in the lagoon, but with no success. At this I was somewhat inclined to feel desperate until the thought came to me to try outside the lagoon in the open sea. Here, at times, I caught odd fish, but so infrequently that they proved of but little help in keeping us from the hunger which threatened. It seemed to me that our deaths were likely to come by hunger, and not by the growth of the thing which had seized upon our bodies. We were in this state of mind when the 4th month wore out. Then I made a very horrible discovery. One morning, a little before midday, I came off from the ship with a portion of the biscuits which were left. In the mouth of her tent I saw my sweetheart sitting, eating something. "What is it, my dear?" I called out as I leapt ashore. Yet on hearing my voice she seemed confused, and turning slyly threw something towards the edge of the little clearing. It fell short, and a vague suspicion having arisen within me, I walked across and picked it up. It was a piece of the grey fungus. As I went to her with it in my hand, she turned deadly pale, then a rose red. I felt strangely dazed and frightened. My dear, I said, and could say no more. Yet at my words she broke down and cried bitterly. Gradually, as she calmed, I got from her the news that she had tried it the preceding day and liked it. I got her to promise on her knees not to touch it again, however great our hunger. After she had promised, she told me that the desire for it had come suddenly, and that, until the moment of desire, she had experienced nothing towards it but the most extreme repulsion. Later in the day, feeling strangely restless and much shaken with the thing which I had discovered, I made my way along one of the twisted paths, formed by the white, sand-like substance which led among the fungoid growth. I had once before ventured along there, but not to any great distance. This time, being involved in perplexing thought, I went much further than hitherto. Suddenly I was called to myself by a queer hoarse sound on my left. Turning quickly, I saw that there was movement among an extraordinarily shaped mass of fungus close to my elbow. It was swaying uneasily as though it possessed life of its own. Abruptly, as I stared, the thought came to me that the thing had a grotesque resemblance to the figure of a distorted human creature. Even as the fancy flashed into my brain, there was a slight sickening noise of tearing, and I saw that one of the branch-like arms was detaching itself from the surrounding grey masses and coming towards me. The head of the thing, a shapeless grey ball, inclined in my direction. I stood stupidly, and the vile harm brushed across my face. I gave out a frightened cry and ran back a few paces. There was a sweetish taste upon my lips where the thing had touched me. I licked them and was immediately filled with an inhuman desire. I turned and seized a mass of the fungus, then more and more. I was insatiable. In the midst of the devouring, the remembrance of the morning's discovery swept into my mazed brain. It was sent by God. I dashed the fragment I held to the ground, then, utterly wrecked and feeling a dreadful guiltiness, I made my way back to the little encampment. I think she knew, by some marvellous intuition which love must have given so soon as she set eyes on me. Her quiet sympathy made it easier for me, and I told her of my sudden weakness, yet omitted to mention the extraordinary thing which had gone before. I desired to spare her all unnecessary terror. But, for myself, I had added an intolerable knowledge to breed an incessant terror in my brain. For I doubted not but that I had seen the end of one of those men who had come to the island in the ship in the lagoon, and in that monstrous ending, I had seen our own. Thereafter we kept from the abominable food, though the desire for it had entered into our blood. Yet our drear punishment was upon us, for, day by day, with monstrous rapidity, the fungoid growth took hold of our poor bodies. Nothing we could do would check it materially, and so, we who had been human became, well, it matters less each day. Only we had been man and maid. And day by day the fight is more dreadful to withstand the hunger lust for the terrible lichen. A week ago we ate the last of the biscuit, and since that time I have caught 3 fish. I was out here fishing tonight when your schooner drifted upon me out of the mist. I hailed you. You know the rest, and may God, out of his great heart, bless you for the goodness to a couple of poor outcast souls. There was a dip of an oar. Another. Then the voice came again, and for the last time, sounding through the slight surrounding mist, ghostly and mournful. God bless you. Goodbye. Goodbye, we shouted together, hoarsely, our hearts full of many emotions. I glanced about me. I became aware that the dawn was upon us. The sun flung a stray beam across the hidden sea, pierced the mist dully, and lit up the receding boat with a gloomy fire. Indistinctly I saw something nodding between the oars. I thought of a sponge, a great grey nodding sponge. The oars continued to ply. They were grey, as was the boat, and my eyes searched a moment vainly for the conjunction of hand and oar. My gaze flashed back to the head. It nodded forward as the oars went backward for the stroke. Then the oars were dipped, the boat shot out of the patch of light, and the thing went nodding into the mist. And that is the end of The Voice in the Night, and where I shall take us to a break. So I'll see you in like 5 minutes. You know what to do. Get up, stretch, rotate those fluids and those limbs, and see you in like 5 minutes or so, friends. Thank you. spoilers, because I just put it in chat. What will be the last story? The Derelicts for tonight. But yeah, I mean, I keep saying it. I just think these are really good stories. I think just the way he writes, the things that he chooses to focus on, and the way that the information is delivered, like it's revealed at a good pace. With horror stories, with ghost stories and such, I feel like a lot of the ones in this era, you can kind of, I don't know, so it feels like sometimes authors are like in too much of a hurry to tell you about the monster they've thought up. You've not come across many nautical horror short stories before, and the pacing and stuff. Yeah, like say this is. I mean, all credit to Lucy for finding this. I probably wouldn't have come across Hodgson's work if she'd not like picked up the book. I think it's because I'm still on. The ooh sound from Lucy was still just like stuck there. Oh, lovely. Yeah, like if she'd not got me this, I wouldn't have read these. But yeah, yeah, exactly. I love that. Like Hodgson's clearly gone, well, I know about the sea because I've spent a lot of time there, so that's what I'm going to write about. And it's clearly like as a setting, as a mood and an atmosphere, it's very clearly like informed his work, that he's actually put that into there, and it makes it feel much more just evocative, I guess, as a place for the story to be set. Which, yeah, so that the one that I'm not going to be reading tonight then is called Out of... Oh, it's very short. Maybe I do Out of the Storm, I don't know. Do you like horror short stories that are just, isn't this weird thing messed up, have some vibes, no, I will not elaborate? Yeah, those ones are good. I was going to say, Algernon Blackwood as well. If you've not heard or read The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, that's like another one that we've done here recently, which like stood out as a, oh, these are some good weird vibes. Just here's a bunch of creepy weird stuff. And, that's kind of it. Like, that, I think I was, sort of discussing this on the Discord recently. It's kind of about, like, sci-fi short stories. But just short fiction in general is a really good medium to just be like, I've got some good ideas for some weird vibes. I don't really want to go into the whole, like, background detail of world building and setting and stuff. I just kind of need to get you into the story, deliver this weird-ass payload of a thing that I've thought up, and then get out. I don't have to set things up. I don't have to really pay them off and give you some sort of, you've not spent like 15, 20 quid on this book and you expect like a satisfying, deep resolution that sits with you for months afterwards for the however many hours you've invested into reading this. You can just get in and out within an hour, boom, done. Here are some vibes, off you go, digest that for the rest of the day. It's, yeah, like short fiction's great. Big fan. A+ would recommend. So let's do that. This one is a little bit, oh crumbs, this one's actually quite long. How long are we looking? Let's redo the Derelicts. Or maybe we don't do the Derelicts. Maybe we do something different. How long is that? Oh, is that just as long? Sorry, well, I'm aware that I'm wasting time whilst making decisions. Let's do something different. Let's do... Oh no, he's going off script. What's happened? It's weird. So that was the nautical horror. And another one is The Derelict, which is up on Bandcamp if you want to listen to it. This is not just a plug for Bandcamp. This is me just realising I'd like to do something different. This is still by William Hope Hodgson, but this is not a nautical one. This is The Gateway of the Monster, which is different. This is one of his Carnacki stories, which, if you weren't here at the start, is his sort of Sherlock Holmes paranormal investigator figure who he has written multiple stories about. And as I say, I think it's inspired by Algernon Blackwood's character. I think it's called something like John Silence or something. Something Silence is a good name for like paranormal investigator. But yes, this will be that, which in just a second I will start. Old Timey Ghost Hunter, you're so in? Yeah. I think this was the one, I'd messaged Lucy to be like, oh, these are good. I think it was when I was in this one, I was like, oh, okay, this book rules. This guy can spin a story. So, I'm obviously hyping it up, but you know. Exactly, what some weird stuff's going on. You only get the swearing on talking over the games, I'm afraid. So, a doot, great. That's probably the best parnets I've seen in a long time. Anyway, I'm gonna read a story, and you can see what you think of it. This one is called The Gateway of the Monster. In response to Karnaki's usual card of invitation to have dinner and listen to a story, I arrived promptly at 427 Chain Walk to find 3 others who were always invited to those happy little times there before me. 2 things. Firstly, obviously, I've realised I've linked the wrong story at the top of chat. Secondly, I have to let Joey out. So, if someone wants to find a text for The Gateway of the Monster while I let Joey out, that would be great. Back in a second. Lol, psych, this is what happens when you prank yourself and change plans at the last second. I will also look and we will see who wins. Is it going to be me? No, this is an analysis of WordPress, Tuesday Terror. What do you do? Oh, there we go, that's the text. Great, there we go. Good work, everybody. Hey, Andy Pants, that's the same one as I just found. Nice. Right, there we go. I'll start again from the beginning because, you know, 2 lines in is a bit of a weird place to stop. Wonderful. Jinx, twice in one day? No. Except I didn't post mine. Anyway, let us start again, so you can actually enjoy the story. The Gateway of the Monster, which, to warn you, this is the one that has an ill fate for a cat, so just, you know, sorry about that. It doesn't end well for the cat. Maybe it does, we don't actually see it, but maybe the cat's fine. In response to Karnaki's usual card of invitation to have dinner and listen to a story, I arrived promptly at 427 Chain Walk to find the 3 others who were always invited to these happy little times there before me. 5 minutes later, Karnaki, Arkwright, Jessup, Taylor and I were all engaged in the pleasant occupation of dining. "You've not been long away this time," I remarked, as I finished my soup, forgetting momentarily Karnaki's dislike of being asked even to skirt the borders of his story until such time as he was ready. Then he would not stint words. "No," he replied with brevity, and I changed the subject, remarking that I had been buying a new gun, to which piece of news he gave an intelligent nod and a smile, which I think showed a genuinely good-humoured appreciation of my intentional changing of the conversation. Later, when dinner was finished, Karnaki snugged himself comfortably down in his big chair along with his pipe and began his story, with very little circumlocution. "As Dodgson was remarking just now, I've only been away a short time, and for a very good reason, too. I've only been away a short distance. The exact locality, I'm afraid I must not tell you, but it is less than 20 miles from here. Though, except for changing a name, that won't spoil the story. And it is a story, too. One of the most extraordinary things I have ever run against." I received a letter a fortnight ago from a man I will call Anderson, asking for an appointment. I arranged a time, and when he turned up I found that he wished me to look into and see whether I could not clear up a long-standing and well-authenticated case of what he terms haunting. He gave me very full particulars, and finally, as the thing seems to present something unique, I decided to take it up. 2 days later, I drove up to the house late in the afternoon and discovered it a very old place standing quite alone in its own grounds. Anderson had left a letter with the butler, I found, pleading excuses for his absence and leaving the whole house at my disposal for my investigations. The butler evidently knew the object of my visit, and I questioned him pretty thoroughly during dinner, which I had in rather lonely state. He is an elderly and privileged servant, and had the history of the grey room exact in detail. From him I learned more particulars regarding 2 things that Anderson had mentioned in but a casual manner. The first was that the door of the grey room would be heard in the dead of night to open and slam heavily, and this even though the butler knew it was locked, and the key on the bunch in his pantry. The second was that the bedclothes would always be found torn off the bed and hurled in a heap in the corner. But it was the door slamming that chiefly bothered the old butler. Many and many a time, he told me, he had lain awake and just shivered with fright, listening. For, at times, the door would be slammed time after time, thud, 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 so that sleep was impossible. From Anderson, I knew already that the room had a history extending back over 150 years. 3 people had been strangled in it, an ancestor of his and his wife and child. This is authentic, as I had taken very great pains to make sure, so that you can imagine it was with a feeling that I had a striking case to investigate that I went upstairs after dinner to have a look at the grey room. Peters, the butler, was in rather a state about my going, and assured me with much solemnity that in all the 20 years of his service no one had ever entered that room after nightfall. He begged me, in quite a fatherly way, to wait till the morning, when there would be no danger, and then he could accompany me himself. Of course, I told him not to bother. I explained that I should do no more than look around a bit, and perhaps fix a few seals. He need not fear, I was used to that sort of thing. But he shook his head when I said that. "There isn't many ghosts like ours, sir," he assured me with mournful pride, and by Jove, he was right, as you will see. I took a couple of candles, and Peters followed with his bunch of keys. He unlocked the door, but would not come inside with me. He was evidently in quite a fright, and renewed his request that I would put off my examination until daylight. Of course, I laughed at him and told him he could stand sentry at the door and catch anything that came out. "It never comes outside, sir," he said in his funny, old, solemn manner. Somehow, he managed to make me feel as if I were going to have the creeps right away. Anyway, it was one to him, you know. I left him there and examined the room. It is a big apartment, and well furnished in the grand style, with a huge 4-poster which stands with its head to the end wall. There were 2 candles on the mantelpiece, and 2 on each of the 3 tables that were in the room. I lit the lot, and after that the room felt a little less inhumanly dreary, though, mind you, it was quite fresh and well kept in every way. After I had taken a good look round, I sealed lengths of bebe ribbon across the windows, along the walls, over the pictures, and over the fireplace and the wall closets. All the time, as I worked, the butler stood just without the door, and I could not persuade him to enter, though I jested with him a little, as I stretched the ribbons, and went here and there about my work. Every now and again he would say, "You'll excuse me, I'm sure, sir, but I do wish you would come out, sir. I'm fair in a quake for you." I told him he need not wait, but he was loyal enough in his way to what he considered his duty. He said he could not go away and leave me alone there. He apologized, but made it very clear that I did not realize the danger of the room, and I could see generally that he was getting into a really frightened state. All the same, I had to make the room so that I should know if anything material entered it, so I asked him not to bother me unless he really heard or saw something. He was beginning to fret my nerves, and the feel of the room was bad enough already without making things any nastier. For a time further I worked, stretching ribbons across a little above the floor and sealing them so that the merest touch would break the seals were anyone to venture into the room in the dark, with the intention of playing the fool. All this had taken me far longer than I had anticipated, and suddenly I heard a clock strike 11. I had taken off my coat soon after commencing work. Now, however, as I had practically made an end of all that I intended to do, I walked across to the settee and picked it up. I was in the act of getting into it when the old butler's voice, he had not said a word for the last hour, came sharp and frightened. "Come out, quick, sir! There's something going to happen!" Jove! But I jumped, and then in the same moment one of the candles on the table to the left of the bed went out. Now, whether it was the wind or what I do not know, but just for a moment I was enough startled to make a run for the door, though I am glad to say that I pulled up before I reached it. I simply could not bunk out, with the butler standing there after having, as it were, read him a sort of lesson on being brave, you know. So I just turned right round, picked up the 2 candles off the mantelpiece, and walked across to the table near the bed. Well, I saw nothing. I blew out the candle that was still alight. Then I went to those on the 2 other tables, and blew them out. Then, outside of the door, the old man called again. "Oh, sir, do be told, do be told!" "All right, Peters," I said, and by Jove my voice was not as steady as I should have liked. I made for the door and had a bit of work not to start running. I took some thundering long strides, though, as you can imagine. Near the entrance I had a sudden feeling that there was a cold wind in the room. It was almost as if the window had been suddenly opened a little. I got to the door, and the old butler gave back a step in a sort of instinctive way. "Collar the candles, Peters," I said pretty sharply, and shoved them into his hands. I turned and caught the handle and slammed the door shut with a crash. Somehow, do you know, as I did so, I thought I felt something pull back on it, but it must have been only fancy. I turned the key in the lock, and then again, double-locking the door. I felt easier then, and set to and sealed the door. In addition, I put my card over the keyhole and sealed it there, after which I pocketed the key and went downstairs, with Peters, who was nervous and silent, leading the way. Poor old beggar. It had not struck me until that moment that he had been enduring a considerable strain during the last 2 or 3 hours. About midnight I went to bed. My room lay at the end of the corridor upon which opens the door of the grey room. I counted the doors between it and mine and found that 5 rooms lay between, and I am sure you can understand that I was not sorry. Just as I was beginning to undress, an idea came to me, and I took my candle and sealing wax and sealed the doors of all the 5 rooms. If any door slammed in the night, I should know just which one. I returned to my room, locked myself in, and went to bed. I was waked, suddenly, from a deep sleep by a loud crash somewhere out in the passage. I sat up in bed and listened, but heard nothing. Then I lit my candle. I was in the very act of lighting it when there came the bang of a door being violently slammed along the corridor. I jumped out of bed and got my revolver. I unlocked the door and went out into the passage, holding my candle high and keeping the pistol ready. Then a queer thing happened. I could not go a step towards the grey room. You all know I am not really a cowardly chap. I've gone into too many cases connected with ghostly things to be accused of that, but I tell you I funked it. Simply funked it, just like any blessed kid. There was something precious unholy in the air that night. I backed into my bedroom and shut and locked the door. Then I sat on the bed all night and listened to the dismal thudding of a door up the corridor. The sound seemed to echo through all the house. Daylight came at last, and I washed and dressed. The door had not slammed for about an hour, and I was getting back my nerve again. I felt ashamed of myself, though in some ways it was silly. For when you're meddling with that sort of thing, your nerve is bound to go sometimes, and you just have to sit quiet and call yourself a coward until the safety of the day comes. Sometimes it is more than just cowardice, I fancy. I believe at times it is something warning you and fighting for you. But all the same, I always feel mean and miserable after a time like that. When the day came properly, I opened my door, and keeping my revolver handy, went quietly along the passage. I had to pass the head of the stairs on the way, and who should I see coming up but the old butler, carrying a cup of coffee. He had merely tucked his nightshirt into his trousers, and he'd an old pair of carpet slippers on. "Hello, Peters," I said, feeling suddenly cheerful, for I was glad as any lost child to have a live human being close to me. "Where are you off to with the refreshments?" The old man gave a start and slopped... Sorry, 1 second. Joey just howling at the door. Right. He's just knock and runned. He stopped by the door howling, and as soon as I opened it, he charges off, chirping to himself. Great. Where were we? There we are. The old man gave a start and slopped some of the coffee. He stared up at me, and I could see that he looked white and done up. He came on up the stairs and held out the little tray to me. "I'm very thankful indeed, sir, to see you safe and well," he said. "I feared one time you might risk going into the grey room, sir. I've lain awake all night with the sound of the door, and when it came light I thought I'd make you a cup of coffee. I knew you'd want to look at the seals, and somehow it seemed safer with those two, sir." "Peters," I said, "you're a brick. This is very thoughtful of you." And I drank the coffee. "Come along," I told him, and handed him back the tray. "I'm going to have a look at what the brutes have been up to. I simply hadn't the pluck to in the night." "I'm very thankful, sir," he replied. "Flesh and blood can do nothing, sir, against devils, and that's what's in the grey room after dark." I examined the seals on all the doors as I went along, and found them right. But when I got to the grey room, the seal was broken, though the visiting card over the keyhole was untouched. I ripped it off and unlocked the door and went in rather cautiously, as you can imagine. I hear Joey again. But the whole room was empty of anything to frighten one, and there was heaps of light. I examined all of the seals, and not a single one was disturbed. The old butler had followed me in, and suddenly he said, "The bedclothes, sir." I ran up to the bed and looked over, and surely they were lying in the corner of the left to the left of the bed. Jove, you can imagine how queer I felt. Something had been in the room. I stared for a while from the bed to the clothes on the floor. I had a feeling that I did not want to touch either. Old Peters, though, did not seem to be affected that way. He went over to the bed coverings and was going to pick them up, as doubtless he had done every day these 20 years back. But I stopped him. I wanted nothing touched until I had finished my examination. This I must have spent a full hour over, and then I let Peter straighten up the bed. After which we went out, and I locked the door, for the room was getting on my nerves. And now I will try and let Joey in again. 1 second. Okay. Right. It's windy outside, and so the cat is feral. Good. He's probably going to try and jump on the laptop and press some shortcuts. So, if the stream breaks, that's what's happened. I had a short walk, and then breakfast, which made me feel more my own man. Then to the grey room again, and, with Peter's help and one of the maids, I had everything taken out except the bed, even the very pictures. I examined the walls, floor, and ceiling then, with probe, hammer, and magnifying glass, but found nothing unusual. I can assure you I began to realize in very truth that some incredible thing had been loose in the room during the past night. I sealed up everything again and went out, locking and sealing the door as before. After dinner that night, Peters and I unpacked some of my stuff, and I fixed up my camera and flashlight opposite to the door of the grey room, with a string from the trigger of the flashlight to the door. You see, if the door were really opened, the flashlight would blare out, and there would be, possibly, a very queer picture to examine in the morning. The last thing I did, before leaving, was to uncap the lens, and after that, I went off to my bedroom and to bed. For I intended to be up at midnight, and to ensure this, I set my little alarm to call me. Also, I left my candle burning. The clock woke me at 12, and I got up and into my dressing gown and slippers. I shoved my revolver into the right side pocket and opened the door. Then I lit my dark room lamp and withdrew the slide, so that it would give a clear light. I carried it up the corridor about 30 feet and put it down on the floor, with the open side away from me, so that it would show me anything that might approach along the dark passage. Then I went back and sat in the doorway of my room, with my revolver handy, staring up the passage towards the place where I knew my camera stood outside of the door of the grey room. I should think I had watched for about an hour and a half when, suddenly, I heard a faint noise away up the corridor. I was immediately conscious of a queer, prickling sensation about the back of my head, and my hands began to sweat a little. The following instant, the whole end of the passage flicked into sight in the abrupt glare of the flashlight. Then came the succeeding darkness, and I peered nervously up the corridor, listening tensely, and trying to find what lay beyond the faint red glow of my dark lamp, which now seemed ridiculously dim by contrast with the tremendous blaze of the flash powder. And then, as I stooped forward, staring and listening, there came the crashing thud of the door of the grey room. The sound seemed to fill the whole of the large corridor and go echoing hollowly through the house. I tell you, I felt horrible, as if my bones were water. Simply beastly. Jove, how I did stare and how I listened. And then it came again, thud, 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 and then a silence that was almost worse than the noise of the door, for I kept fancying that some brutal thing was stealing upon me along the corridor. Suddenly, my lamp was put out, and I could not see a yard before me. I realized all at once that I was doing a very silly thing, sitting there, and I jumped up. Even as I did so, I thought I heard a sound in the passage quite near to me. I made one backward spring into my room, and slammed and locked the door. I sat on my bed and stared at the door. I had my revolver in my hand, but it seemed an abominably useless thing. Can you understand? I felt that there was something on the other side of my door. For some unknown reason, I knew it was pressed up against the door, and it was soft. That was just what I thought. Most extraordinary thing to imagine when you come to think of it. Presently, I got hold of myself a bit and marked out a pentacle hurriedly with chalk on the polished floor, and there I sat in it until it was almost dawn. And all the time, away up the corridor, the door of the grey room thudded at solemn and horrid intervals. It was a miserable, brutal night. When the day began to break, the thudding of the door came gradually to an end, and at last I grabbed together my courage and went along the corridor in the half-light to cap the lens of my camera. I can tell you it took some doing, but if I had not gone, my photograph would have been spoilt, and I was tremendously keen to save it. I got back to my room, and then set to and rubbed out the 5-pointed star in which I had been sitting.
I'm reading, my love. Do you want to come over?
He might. Half an hour later, there was a tap at my door. It was Peters with my coffee. When I had drunk it, we both walked along to the grey room. Yes, do you want to go to the grey room? No, you don't, because that's where bad things happen. As we went, I had a look at the seals on the other doors, but they were untouched. The seal on the door of the grey room was broken, as also was the string from the trigger of the flashlight, but the visiting card over the keyhole was still there. I ripped it off and opened the door. Nothing unusual was to be seen until we came to the bed. Then I saw that, as on the previous day, the bedclothes had been torn off and hurled into the left-hand corner exactly where I had seen them before. I felt very queer, but I did not forget to look at all the seals, only to find that not one had been broken. Then I turned and looked at old Peters, and he looked at me, nodding his head. "Let's get out of here," I said. "It's no place for any living human to enter without proper protection." After we went out, I locked and sealed the door again. After breakfast, I developed the negative, but it showed only the door of the grey room half opened. Then I left the house, as I wanted to get certain matters and implements that might be necessary to life, perhaps to the spirit, for I intended to spend the coming night in the grey room. I got back in a cab about 5:30 with my apparatus, and this Peters and I carried up to the grey room, where I piled it carefully in the centre of the floor. When everything was in the room, including a cat which I had brought, I locked and sealed the door and went towards my bedroom, telling Peters I should not be down to dinner. He said, "Yes, sir," and went downstairs, thinking that I was going to turn in, which was what I wanted him to believe, as I knew he would have worried both himself and me if he had known what I intended. But I merely got my camera and flashlight from the bedroom and hurried back to the grey room. I entered and locked and sealed myself in and set to work, for I had a lot to do before it got dark. First, I cleared away all the ribbons across the floor. Then I carried the cat, still fastened in its basket, over towards the far wall and left it. I returned then to the centre of the room, and measured out a space 21 feet in diameter, which I swept with a broom of hyssop. About this I drew a circle of chalk, taking care never to step over the circle. Beyond this I smudged with a bunch of garlic a broad belt right round the chalked circle, and when this was complete I took from among my stores in the centre a small jar of a certain water. I broke away the parchment and withdrew the stopper. Then, dipping my left forefinger in the little jar, I went round the circle again, making upon the floor just within the line of chalk, the second sign of the Samar ritual, and joining each sign most carefully with the left-handed crescent. I can tell you I felt easier when this was done, and the water circle complete. Then I unpacked some more of the stuff that I had brought, and placed a lighted candle in the valley of each crescent. After that, I drew a pentacle, so that each of the 5 points of the defensive star touched the chalk circle. In the 5 points of the star I placed 5 portions of a certain bread, each wrapped in linen, and in the 5 veils 5 opened jars of the water I had used to make the water circle, and now I had my first protective barrier complete. Now, anyone except you who know something of my methods of investigation might consider all this a piece of useless and foolish superstition. But you all remember the Black Veil case, in which I believe my life was saved by a very similar form of protection, whilst Asta, who sneered at it, would not come inside, died. I got the idea from the Sigsand missive, written, so far as I can make out, in the 14th century. At first, naturally, I imagined it was just an expression of the superstition of his time, and it was not until long after my first reading that it occurred to me to test his defence, which I did, as I've just said, in that horrible Black Veil business. You know how that turned out. Later, I used it several times, and always I came through safe until that moving fur case. It was only a partial defence there, and I nearly died in the pentacle. After that, I came across Professor Garder's experiments with a medium. When they surrounded the medium with a current of a certain number of vibrations, in vacuum he lost his power, almost as if it cut him off from the immaterial. That made me think, and led, eventually, to the electric pentacle, which is a most marvellous defence against certain manifestations. I used the shape of the defensive star for this protection, because I have, personally, no doubt at all but that there is some extraordinary virtue in the old magic figure. Curious thing for a 20th century man to admit, is it not? But then, as you all know, I never did, and never will, allow myself to be blinded by a little cheap laughter. I ask questions, and keep my eyes open. In this last case, I had little doubt that I had run up against an ab-natural monster, and I meant to take every possible care, for the danger is abominable. I turned to now to fit the electric pentacle, setting it so that each of its points and veils coincided exactly with the points and veils of the drawn pentagram upon the floor. Then I connected up the battery, and the next instant the pale blue glare from the intertwining vacuum tubes shone out. I glanced about me then, with something of a sigh of relief, and realized suddenly that the dusk was upon me, for the window was grey and unfriendly. Then I stared round at the big, empty room, over the double barrier of electric and candle light, and had an abrupt, extraordinary sense of weirdness thrust upon me. In the air, you know, it seemed. As it were a sense of something inhuman impending. The room was full of the stench of bruised garlic, a smell I hate. I turned now to my camera, and saw that it and the flashlight were in order. Then I tested the action of my revolver carefully, though I had little thought that it would be needed. Yet, to what extent materialization of an ab-natural creature is possible, given favourable conditions, no one can say, and I had no idea what horrible thing I was going to see or feel the presence of. I might, in the end, have to fight with a material thing. I did not know, and could only be prepared. You see, I never forgot that 3 people had been strangled in the bed close to me, and the fierce slamming of the door I had heard myself. I had no doubt that I was investigating a dangerous and ugly case. By this time the night had come, though the room was very light with the burning candles, and I found myself glancing behind me constantly, and then all round the room. It was nervy work waiting for that thing to come into the room. Suddenly, I was aware of a little cold wind sweeping over me, coming from behind. I gave one great nerve thrill, and then a prickly feeling went all over the back of my head. Then I hove myself round with a sort of stiff jerk, and stared straight against that queer wind. It seemed to come from the corner of the room to the left of the bed, the place where both times I had found the heap of tossed bedclothes. Yet I could see nothing unusual. No opening. Nothing. Abruptly I was aware that the candles were all aflicker in that unnatural wind. I believe I just squatted there and stared in a horribly frightened wooden way for some minutes. I shall never be able to let you know how disgustingly horrible it was, sitting in that vile cold wind. And then, flick, 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 all the candles round the outer barrier went out, and there was I, locked and sealed in that room, and with no light beyond the weakish blue glare of the electric pentacle. A time of abominable tenseness passed, and still that wind blew upon me. And then, suddenly, I knew that something stirred in the corner to the left of the bed. I was made conscious of it, rather by some inward unused sense than by either sight or sound, for the pale, short radius glare of the pentacle gave but a very poor light for seeing by. Yet, as I stared, something began slowly to grow upon my sight, a moving shadow, a little darker than the surrounding shadows. I lost the thing amid the vagueness, and for a moment or two I glanced swiftly from side to side, with a fresh, new sense of impending danger. Then my attention was directed to the bed. All the coverings were being drawn steadily off with a hateful, stealthy sort of motion. I heard the slow, dragging slither of the clothes, but I could see nothing of that thing that pulled. I was aware, in a funny, subconscious, introspective fashion, that the creep had come upon me, prickling all over my head, yet that I was cooler mentally than I had been for some minutes, sufficiently so to feel that my hands were sweating coldly, and to shift my revolver half-consciously whilst I rubbed my right hand dry upon my knee, though never for an instant taking my gaze or my attention from those moving clothes. The faint noises from the bed ceased once, and there was a most intense silence, with only the dull thudding of the blood beating in my head. Yet, immediately afterwards, I heard again the slurring sound of the bedclothes being dragged off the bed. In the midst of my nervous tension, I remembered the camera, and reached round for it, but without looking away from the bed. And then, all in a moment, the whole of the bed coverings were torn off with extraordinary violence, and I heard the flump they made as they were hurled into the corner. There was a time of absolute quietness then, for perhaps a couple of minutes, and you can imagine how horrible I felt. The bedclothes had been thrown with such savageness. And then again the abominable unnaturalness of the thing that had just been done before me. Suddenly, over by the door, I heard a faint noise, a sort of crickling sound, and then a pitter or two upon the floor. A great, nervous thrill swept over me, seeming to run up my spine and over the back of my head, for the seal that secured the door had just been broken. Something was there. I could not see the door. At least, I mean to say that it was impossible to say how much I actually saw, and how much my imagination supplied. I made it out only as a continuation of the grey walls, and then it seemed to me that something dark and indistinct moved and wavered there among the shadows. Abruptly, I was aware that the door was opening, and with an effort I reached again for my camera, but before I could aim it, the door was slammed with a terrific crash that filled the whole room with a sort of hollow thunder. I jumped, like a frightened child. There seemed such a power behind the noise, as if a vast, wanton force were out. Can you understand? The door was not touched again, but directly afterwards I heard the basket in which the cat lay creak. I tell you, I fairly pringled all along my back. I knew that I was going to learn definitely whether whatever was abroad was dangerous to life. From the cat there rose suddenly a hideous caterwaul that ceased abruptly, and then, too late, I snapped off the flashlight. In the great glare I saw that the basket had been overturned and the lid was wrenched open with the cat lying half in and half out upon the floor. I saw nothing else, but I was full of the knowledge that I was in the presence of some being or thing that had power to destroy. During the next 2 or 3 minutes there was an odd, noticeable quietness in the room, and you must remember I was half blinded for the time because of the flashlight, so that the whole place seemed to be pitchy dark just beyond the shine of the pentacle. I tell you, it was most horrible. I just knelt there in the star, and whirled round on my knees trying to see whether anything was coming at me. My power of sight came gradually, and I got a little hold of myself, and abruptly I saw the thing I was looking for close to the water circle. It was big and indistinct, and wavered curiously as though the shadow of a vast spider hung suspended in the air just beyond the barrier. It passed swiftly round the circle and seemed to probe ever towards me, but only to draw back with extraordinary jerky movements, as might a living person who touched the hot bar of a grate. Round and round it moved, and round I turned. Then, just opposite to one of the veils of the pentacles, it seemed to pause as though preliminary to a tremendous effort. It retired almost beyond the glow of the vacuum light, and then came straight towards me, appearing to gather form and solidity as it came. There seemed a vast malign determination behind the movement that must succeed. I was on my knees, and I jerked back, falling onto my left hand and hip in a wild endeavour to get back from the advancing thing. With my right hand I was grabbing madly for my revolver, which I had let slip. The brutal thing came with one great sweep straight over the garlic and the water circle, almost to the veil of the pentacle. I believe I yelled. Then, just as suddenly as it had swept over, it seemed to be hurled back by some mighty, invisible force. It must have been some moments before I realized that I was safe. And then I got myself together in the middle of the pentacles, feeling horribly gone and shaken, and glancing round and round the barrier. But the thing had vanished. Yet I had learnt something, for I knew now that the grey room was haunted by a monstrous hand. Suddenly, as I crouched there, I saw what had so nearly given the monster an opening through the barrier. In my movements within the pentacle, I must have touched one of the jars of water, for just where the thing had made its attack, the jar that guarded the deep of the veil had been moved to one side, and this had left one of the 5 doorways unguarded. I put it back quickly and felt almost safe again, for I had found the cause of the defence was still good. I had found the cause, and the defence was still good. I began to hope again that I should see the morning come in. When I saw that thing so nearly succeed, I'd had an awful, weak, overwhelming feeling that the barriers could never bring me safe through the night against such a force. You can understand. For a long time I could not see the hand, but presently I thought I saw once or twice an odd wavering over among the shadows near the door. A little later, as though in a sudden fit of malignant rage, the dead body of the cat was picked up and beaten with dull, sickening blows against the solid floor. That made me feel rather queer. A minute afterwards, the door was opened and slammed twice with tremendous force. The next instant, the thing made one swift, vicious dart at me, from out of the shadows. Instinctively I stared sideways from it, and so plucked my hand from upon the electric pentacle where, for a wickedly careless moment, I had placed it. The monster was hurled off from the neighbourhood of the pentacles, though, owing to my inconceivable foolishness, it had been enabled for a second time to pass the outer barriers. I can tell you I shook for a time with sheer funk. I moved right to the centre of the pentacles again, and knelt there, making myself as small and compact as possible. As I knelt, I began to have presently a vague wonder at the 2 accidents which had so nearly allowed the brute to get at me. Was I being influenced to unconscious voluntary actions that endangered me? The thought took hold of me, and I watched my every movement. Abruptly I stretched a tired leg and knocked over one of the jars of water. Some was spilled, but because of my suspicious watchfulness I had it upright and back within the veil, while yet some of the water remained. Even as I did so, the vast, black, half-materialized hand beat up at me out of the shadows, and seemed to leap almost into my face. So nearly did it approach, but for the 3rd time it was thrown back by some altogether enormous, overmastering force. Yet, apart from the dazed fright in which it left me, I had, for a moment, that feeling of spiritual sickness, as if some delicate, beautiful inward grace had suffered, which is felt only upon the too near approach of the ab-human, and is more dreadful in a strange way than any physical pain that can be suffered. I knew by this more of the extent and closeness of the danger, and for a long time I was simply cowed by the butt-headed brutality of that force upon my spirit. I can put it no other way. I knelt again in the centre of the pentacles, watching myself with as much fear almost as the monster, for I knew now that, unless I guarded myself from every sudden impulse that came to me, I might simply work my own destruction. Do you see how horrible it all was? I spent the rest of the night in a haze of sick fright, and so tense that I could not make a single movement naturally. I was in such fear that any desire for action that came to me might be prompted by the influence that I knew was at work on me. And outside of the barrier, the ghastly thing went round and round, grabbing and grabbing in the air at me. Twice more was the body of the dead cat molested. The second time I heard every bone in its body crunch and crack. And all the time the horrible wind was blowing upon me from the corner of the room to the left of the bed. Then, just as the first touch of dawn came into the sky, the unnatural wind ceased in a single moment, and I could see no sign of the hand. The dawn came slowly, and presently the wan light filled all the room, and made the pale glare of the electric pentacle look more unearthly. Yet it was not until the day had fully come that I made any attempt to leave the barrier, for I did not know but that there was some method abroad, in the sudden stopping of that wind, to entice me from the pentacles. At last, when the dawn was strong and bright, I took one last look round and ran for the door. I got it on locks, in a nervous, clumsy fashion, then locked it hurriedly and went to my bedroom, where I lay on the bed and tried to steady my nerves. Peters came presently with the coffee, and when I had drunk it, I told him I meant to have a sleep, as I had been up all night. He took the tray and went out quietly, and after I had locked my door, I turned in properly, and at last got to sleep. I woke about midday, and after some lunch went up to the grey room. I switched off the current from the pentacle, which I had left on in my hurry. Also I removed the body of the cat. You can understand I did not want anyone to see the poor brute. After that, I made a very careful search of the corner where the bedclothes had been thrown. I made several holes through the woodwork and probed, but found nothing. Then it occurred to me to try my instrument under the skirting. I did so, and I heard my wire ring on metal. I turned the hook end of the probe that way and fished for the thing. At the second go I got it. It was a small object, and I took it to the window. I found it to be a curious ring made of some greyish metal. The curious thing about it was that it was made in the form of a pentagon. That is, the same shape as the inside of the magic pentacle, but without the mounts which form the points of the defensive star. It was free from all chasing or engraving. You will understand that I was excited when I tell you that I felt sure I held in my hand the famous luck ring of the Anderson family, which, indeed, was of all the things the one most intimately connected with the history of the haunting. This ring had been handed on from father to son through generations, and always, in obedience to some ancient family traditions, each son had to promise never to wear the ring. The ring, I may say, was brought home by one of the Crusaders under very peculiar circumstances, but the story is too long to go into here. It appears that young Sir Hulbert, an ancestor of Anderson's, made a bet one evening, in drink, that he would wear the ring that night. He did so, and in the morning his wife and child were found strangled in the bed, in the very room in which I stood. Many people, it would seem, thought young Sir Hulbert was guilty of having done the thing in drunken anger, and he, in an attempt to prove his innocence, slept a second night in the room. He also was strangled. Since then, no one has spent a night in the grey room until I did so. The ring had been lost so long that its very existence had become almost a myth, and it was most extraordinary to stand there with the actual thing in my hand, as you can understand. It was whilst I stood there looking at the ring that I got an idea. Supposing that it were, in a way, a doorway. You see what I mean? A sort of a gap in the world hedge, if I may so phrase my idea. It was a queer thought, I know, and possibly not my own, but one of those mental nudgings from the outside. You see, the wind had come from that part of the room where the ring lay. I pondered the thought a lot. Then the shape, the inside of a pentacle, it had no mounts, and without the mounts, as the Sigsand missive has it, 3 mounts, which are the 5 hills of safety. To lack is to give power to the demon, and surely to favour the evil thing. You see, the very shape of the ring was significant. I determined to test it. I unmade my pentacle, for it must be made afresh and around the one to be protected. Then I went out and locked the door, after which I left the house, to get certain matters, for neither yarbs nor fire nor water must be used a second time. I returned about 7:30, and as soon as the things I had brought had been carried up to the grey room, I dismissed Peters for the night, just as I had done the evening before. When he had gone downstairs, I let myself into the room and locked and sealed the door. I went to the place in the centre of the room where all the stuff had been packed, and set to work with all my speed to construct a barrier about me and the ring. I do not remember whether I explained to you, but I had reasoned that, if the ring were in any way a medium of admission, and it were enclosed with me in the electric pentacle, it would be, to express it loosely, insulated. Do you see? The force which had visible expression as a hand would have to stay beyond the barrier which separates the ab from the normal, for the gateway would be removed from accessibility. As I was saying, I worked with all my speed to get the barrier completed about me and the ring, for it was already later than I cared to be in that room, unprotected. Also, I had a feeling that there would be a vast effort made that night to regain the use of the ring, for I had the strongest conviction that the ring was a necessity to materialization. You will see whether I was right. I completed the barriers in about an hour, and you can imagine something of the relief I felt when I saw the pale glare of the electric pentacle once more all about me. From then onwards, for about 2 hours, I sat quietly, facing the corner from which the wind came. About 11 o'clock I had a queer knowledge that something was near to me, yet nothing happened for a whole hour after that. Then, suddenly I felt the cold, queer wind begin to blow upon me. To my astonishment, it seemed now to come from behind me, and I whipped round with a hideous quake of fear. The wind met me in the face. It was blowing up from the floor, close to me. I stared down in a sickening maze of new frights. What on earth had I done now? The ring was there, close beside me, where I had put it. Suddenly, as I stared, bewildered, I was aware that there was something queer about the ring. Funny, shadowy movements and convolutions. I looked at them stupidly, and then, abruptly, I knew that the wind was blowing up at me from the ring. A queer, indistinct smoke became visible to me, seeming to pour upwards through that ring, and mix with the moving shadows. Suddenly, I realized that I was in more than any mortal danger, for the convoluting shadows about the ring were taking shape, and the death hand was forming within the pentacle. My goodness, do you realize it? I had brought the gateway into the pentacles, and the brute was coming through, pouring into the material world as gas might pour out from the mouth of a pipe. I should think that I knelt for a couple of moments in a sort of stunned fright. Then, with a mad, awkward movement, I snatched at the ring, intending to hurl it out of the pentacle. Yet it eluded me as though some invisible, living thing jerked it hither and thither. At last I gripped it, but in the same instant it was torn from my grasp with incredible and brutal force. A great black shadow covered it and rose into the air and came at me. I saw that it was the hand, vast and nearly perfect in form. I gave one crazy yell and jumped over the pentacle and the ring of burning candles and ran despairingly for the door. I fumbled idiotically and ineffectually with the key, and all the time I stared with a fear that was like insanity towards the barriers. The hand was plunging towards me. Yet, even as it had been unable to pass into the pentacle when the ring was without, so, now that the ring was within, it had no power to pass out. The monster was chained, as surely as any beast would be, were chains riveted upon it. Even then, in that moment, I got a flash of this knowledge, but I was too utterly shaken with fright to reason. and the instant I managed to get the key turned, I sprang into the passage and slammed the door with a crash. I locked it and got to my room somehow, for I was trembling so that I could hardly stand, as you can imagine. I locked myself in and managed to get the candle lit. Then I lay down on the bed and kept quiet for an hour or two, and so I grew steadier. I got a little sleep later, but woke when Peters brought my coffee. When I had drunk it, I felt altogether better and took the old man along with me whilst I had a look into the grey room. I opened the door and peeped in. The candles were still burning, wan against the daylight, and behind them was the pale, glowing star of the electric pentacle. And there, in the middle, was the ring, the gateway of the monster, lying demure and ordinary. Nothing in the room was touched, and I knew that the brute had never managed to cross the pentacles. Then I went out and locked the door. After a further sleep of some hours, I left the house. I returned in the afternoon in a cab. I had with me an oxyhydrogen jet and 2 cylinders containing the gases. I carried the things to the grey room, and there, in the centre of the electric pentacle, I erected the little furnace. 5 minutes later, the luck ring, once the luck but now the bane of the Anderson family, was no more than a little splash of hot metal. Kanaki felt in his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He passed it to me. I opened it, and found a small circle of greyish metal, something like lead, only harder and rather brighter. "Well?" I asked at length, after examining it and handing it round to the others. "Did that stop the haunting?" Kanaki nodded. "Yes," he said. "I slept 3 nights in the grey room before I left. Old Peters nearly fainted when he knew that I meant to, but by the 3rd night he seemed to realise that the house was just safe and ordinary. And, you know, I believe in his heart he hardly approved." Kanaki stood up and began to shake hands. "Out you go," he said genially. And presently we went pondering to our various homes. The end. Oh wait, no, sorry, I missed a bit. There's a footnote here that says the cat ran in 5 minutes later and was absolutely fine. Kanaki realised that the sounds he had been hearing were just the basket being cracked and crackled and stuff. The cat, absolutely fine, comes back in, and they called it Jefferson. The end. Thank you for listening. Exactly, Pearl. It didn't even have to go to Mount Doom. You just, just get a blowtorch, really. That's where you melt that thing down. You're welcome. I enjoyed that one. I think it was good. Even though it, the cat goes through a slightly spooky time, but comes out fine. He did have to dip out for a bit there. Yeah, he goes a little bit hard on some of those details, I think. I'm assuming that's why. I noticed Joey jumped off my lap at one point while I was reading that as well. And, yeah, it's, hugs are all... Yeah, I do apologise if that was a bit much. And you're welcome, Lynn. As always, thank you for being here, for listening. I hope that the crafts, if you've been doing them, I think I saw you say you were going to be doing some crafting, and if anyone else has been crafting, I hope they've been good, and you've been making some things that you are happy of and proud with. Those are words. But yeah, that brings us to the end of our William Hope Hodgson short stories for the night. And I shall have to prepare some more things for next week. So, yeah. Happy of and proud with. Yeah, indeed. Look, I am audibly struggling right now. Yes, you said earlier Sam's going to regret this voice. Yeah, yes I am. Already you can probably hear there is a certain hoarseness coming through, which is not tonight's story, but another time I should do the horse of the invisible, Lovely spooky vibes, good, I'm glad. Lemon and honey, I have good access to neither. But I'll be alright. Indeed, I am woof, husky. But yeah, I'm going to go. And I see that Adam is live playing Street Fighter 6. So I guess, as we must, we should go over there and say hello to the Seabass crew. So yeah, feel free to join the raid. The anti-chill, well, yeah, but it's. I mean, depending on what he's doing, like he does tournaments and stuff, but generally he's like, yeah, sure, he gets a little bit hype and excitable, but he's a pretty chill guy, and they're a good group. And frankly, sometimes his Street Fighter streams are just him chilling, just like hanging out, watching people playing the game. So yeah, it's a good time. I like it. I've been really enjoying watching those. So yeah, that's where I'm gonna send you. So I'll get that started now, and yeah, thank you all for being here tonight to listen to this. The VOD will be up on YouTube probably tonight, or soon afterwards, depending. And yeah, come back on Wednesday, where Lucy will be continuing Tale of Two Cities. Eventually, I don't know when they get to the second city, but you can always look forward to that. That'll be an exciting landmark. Oh yeah, Raker, I forgot to thank you for your sub at the start of the stream. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're still here. Yeah, thank you for the resub. I hope you're doing well. And yeah, we will see you on the next one. But for now, goodbye and good night.